Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good day. Many times we have an international group, time zones allowing. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome, very, very welcome to our event today. I'm an alcoholic and been sober since February 21st, 1984. Got interested in the traditions someplace around 1990, I think. That's what we're talking about today. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. You know, that prayer really is about principles, the principles of reality. You've heard me many times, if you've heard me at all, say that we need to probably eliminate the word control, or at least reduce our use of it. Control. We don't have any control. And that's not hyperbole. I really believe that. We don't have any control. We have some influence. Some outside ourselves, a little bit more maybe inside ourselves. Influence, not control. That first step in the program, in any 12-step program, is about powerless. And what that means is no choice. I like to use that phrase rather than the word powerless, which most of us become brain dead to because we use it so often, meaning it has no impact on us. It's a habit. Try to find a word that has an impact. Maybe no choice. And yet we have a choice to find principles. Once I had navigated the steps out of the big book precisely with a guide, I was 5 years sober. I don't recommend waiting that long, but it's my story. I determined that I had some principles that I wasn't using, and I didn't have some principles that I needed to have and to use. And later on, I became aware of, this is in probably the early 90s, the traditions in the program, another set of principles. And as I engaged a step guide, a project manager to take me through the steps, I engaged a traditions guide, somebody who had walked the path way before me, who had a lot of information and experience with the tradition, very practical experience being involved in the service structure. And I engaged him to take me through the traditions one by one, in the same way I had been taken through the steps. It was a wonderful experience. And as a result of that, I began to have retreats over a weekend, Friday through Sunday, in which we had panels of people to discuss the traditions based on my understanding and my experience. And then I recorded a pretty extensive workshop on the traditions, a weekly workshop. It's a recommended resource for each of the people who are interested in this particular series to listen to that. It's on YouTube. You go to my YouTube channel, Herb K, YouTube. I just did it yesterday to make sure I knew the protocol. You go to playlists. I'm beginning to become familiar with the vocabulary. And then you just go to the traditions. They were recorded in 2014, and there's 13 sessions there, about an hour long, each of them. The first is an orientation, and then, of course, one workshop on each of the 12 traditions. You might find that helpful. Of course, the basic information is contained in the 12 and 12, 12 steps, 12 traditions published by AA. Al-Anon has its own 12 and 12. I read that actually as a result of this workshop that we're doing here for the very first time. It's a wonderful supplement to all of this work. And then one of the most easily accessible illustrations of each of the traditions is the 12 Traditions Illustrated, because it's a cartoon and it really captures the spirit, the letter certainly, but the spirit of each of the traditions. There's a list of resources that I used originally in my journey of learning about the traditions and incorporating these principles in my personal life, not just in AA. The whole point of this journey is to apply these traditions to our personal life in the same way the steps thawed me out on the inside and gave me principles, operating principles for my personal life, a transformation of a radical proportion. These traditions allowed me to have operating principles in my relationship and in my family and in my friendships and in my community and in the fellowship, of course. Principles are principles are principles are principles. The law of gravity, physics, is not personal. It just is. The steps representing principles of human behavior, they just are. They're not right or wrong. They're just reality. The principles that Bill discerned incorporating into the traditions was based on experience. He has this wonderful image because people were resisting the traditions as we don't need any more complications and we don't certainly need any rules. So these are not complications or rules. These are hammered out on the anvil of experience. What a great image. Blacksmith, of course. Hammered out on the anvil of experience to guide us in our behavior within our groups and amongst our groups to ensure our survival. Because he had become familiar with the Washingtonians. They were the Washingtonians, invisible historically, that Bill, who was completely dedicated to recovery and rehabilitation in alcoholism, 4 years sober, had never heard of them in 1935, 1939, when he's writing the big book. Had never heard of them. And yet it was only 100 years earlier that the Washingtonians had incredible success, much more success than AA in those first 5 years. When Bill wrote the big book in 1939, there were about 100, and that's an exaggeration. Bill liked to round it up. There were about 100 recovered alcoholics, and he used the term recovered to incorporate those people with 6 months of sobriety. That was long-term in those days. 1935, AA had been around for 4.5 years, and when they could count noses, they made a list of the people. It was so short. 5 years. Bill had to stretch to make it 100. 100 years earlier, in the 1840s, literally 100 years earlier, the Washingtonians had 300,000 members in their first 5 years. And they didn't have the advantage of the telegraph and the radio and whatever else communications that Bill had and Alcoholics Anonymous had. Think about that. The Washingtonians was such a prestigious group, acknowledged nationally as very effective with regard to treating alcoholism, that Abraham Lincoln addressed one of their conferences. And yet, 5 years later, that was at 5 years, they had these 300,000 people. 5 years later, 10 years in the business, they were out of business because they got distracted. They got distracted with other issues: women's right to vote, abolition of alcohol, abolition of slavery. Wonderful causes. They felt that they had solved the problem of alcohol. Let's apply the solution that we found for alcohol to other things, and we better publicize ourselves as leaders in this movement and it collapsed. So Bill really, at that point, when somebody confronted him with the question about the Washingtonians, knew that he and Dr. Bob were mortal. And how would AA hang together once they, in fact, passed off the scene? Brilliant, brilliant insight. You have lots of information about the steps. You have lots of information, perhaps, about the tradition, certainly now if you've joined us for a while. You have lots of opinions, perhaps, about principles and decent human living, etc., etc. But let's set it aside, even for today, right now, and ask the Spirit to open our minds and open our hearts to be given an effective insight and perhaps a new experience with this conversation about these last three principles that we will be looking at, 10, 11, and 12. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my principles, the 12 traditions, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my principles, the 12 traditions, and especially you. So the traditions were, as I just described, created to address group function. The group, and I don't mean meetings by that, but it's about the community that goes to meetings. It might be only one meeting, or it might be a series of meetings sponsored by and or managed by, facilitated by a particular group. The problem was group function. That's the spirit of and the letter of the traditions. But at some point, somebody developed the attitude of using the traditions to apply to our personal living. I'm interested in your thoughts of and your experience with the traditions as a group function. That's really relevant because it will help us apply it to our personal living. But if you have made some of those connections also, that's the point of our time together today. I don't do an in-depth teaching on each of the traditions. I did that in the recording, and I'm relying on you to have done your own homework, reading the 12 and 12, reading the illustrated, listening to the recording that's on YouTube. Now, there's a whole list of resources, of references for historical information as well as interpretation of the various traditions in the various literature published by Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. Depending on your time and your energy, you've pursued some of that. Bill gave us overall 3 legacies. That He didn't know where he was going with this. It was all a movement of the spirit. In 1939, it was the group's conscience that we codify the experience of the prior 4 years in a book. Otherwise, it would get distorted. And we know even with the book, the message of the steps is distorted currently. There's so much misinformation and ignorance and incorrect interpretation of the big book, and it's been in writing for almost 100 years and been in use for almost 100 years. I'm not saying I'm an authority at all. I don't mean to imply that. But it's really sad to see people who do not really understand unmanageability, who really do not understand or have an experience with not cured, who really do not understand that we have a daily reprieve based on the program of living, steps 10, 11, and 12. And I personally believe, just on limited experience, that applies to at least half of the people in meetings that I go to. Yes, that is a judgment. I try to rationalize it as an evaluation. And then there are the traditions, much less known, and quite frankly, people, because they have a prejudice about them, oh, that's for people in the service structure. Not really. This is these traditions, as you know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir because here you are. Not only is this fabulous spiritual direction for community connection, it is wonderfully effective in our personal lives. Bill wrote something that we'll address in the second half of this year in the same way we address the traditions in the first half. On a monthly basis, we will look at sets of the concepts. The concepts are Bill's principles for operating a spiritual nonprofit business. If his brilliance is in the first two legacies, it is extraordinary. His brilliance in the construction of and presentation of the concepts. We talked about the 12 steps. I'm confident that Bill was using the framework of the 12 steps as a guide to developing the 12 traditions. I think there's an organic connection between each of them. Step 1, tradition 1. Step 2, tradition 2. I've not done any type of workshop or study on that, but there's an intuitive awareness of it, and it guides me in my interpretation of the traditions. I fall back on my interpretation and experience with each of the steps, and it really helps me unpack the principles of the traditions. Practice. That's the 12th step. Practice principles in all our affairs, meaning our personal life. I did not know I had principles when I did the steps at 4 years of sobriety. I discovered that I had principles that I ignored. And I also discovered that I actually didn't have any conscious relationship with some principles that I would need if I really wanted to be a decent human being. And so I uncovered the principles that I have and breathed some life into them. And I adopted some principles that I didn't have that I knew that would help me become a better person. That's what we're doing here with the traditions. Applying these principles, these that are embedded in each of the traditions, not the letter of the law. That's interesting and worthwhile paying attention to. That's where a good start, but the spirit of it. What's the spirit underneath it? What's the purpose? What's the goal? Guidelines and guardrails. What is it? two words that I've come up with in the last 2 or 3 years with regard to principles. Guidelines going forward, but guardrails that we bump up against to keep us in the flow of reality. I think that's the whole point of principles. Bill uses that term. I've paid now attention to the big book use of the term flow at least 2 or 3 times, that he has this image of the manifestation of life and the manifestation of reality through the manifestation of principles. As I mentioned at the beginning today, just to remind you or to make people aware of it who are here for the first time, you're so welcome to hear. I mean, this is modular. You don't have to have been here for the prior workshops. In fact, they're all recorded and edited and on YouTube, as this one will be, so that you can revisit it. When you're doing the assignments, there's some specific assignments that my tradition guide gave me. He's the one that developed some of these protocols and these templates that you see in the website, and I've referred to as part of the structure of this workshop. What did I read or hear? What does it mean? How does it apply to me? See, this methodology gives us a relationship to bring information into experience. Information will be very interesting to think about and talk about. But when we bring it into our heart and translate it into our feet, we have an experience and it changes us. What is my experience? What is the principle? At the conclusion of the discussion on each of the traditions today, 10 and 11 and 12, we'll remind ourselves and talk about, well, what is the principle? In the material that's on the website, there's a list of principles that I've come up with as part of my own experience and interpretation. It's just, there's nothing official about any of the stuff that is on my website. It's just my knowledge and my interpretation and my experience. All right. So let's start with tradition 10. And what I'm looking at is the worksheet where I have the short form and the long form of the traditions. Trying to be organized here. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on tradition 10 on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. Long form, no AA group or member should ever, in such a way as to implicate AA, express any opinion on outside controversial issues. This says as a member of the group, particularly those of politics, alcohol, reform, sectarian religion. The Alcoholics Anonymous groups oppose no one concerning such matters. They can express no views whatever. Guidelines, no rules or regulations. But again, step back for just a minute and remember what's the purpose of each of the traditions and all of the traditions together. And if we can remember that, we can interpret the suggested guideline, and that is unity. Every one of the traditions is geared to the overarching goal of unity within the group and amongst the groups. Within the group, where you're located, and amongst the groups within the country and within the world. So that, as Bill had said, the steps are for the deflation of the ego of the self. The traditions are for the deflation of the ego of the group. There's that parallel. Bill made it. Tradition 10. Reflection, meditation, questions that I raised. Do I respect the purpose of meetings by not introducing outside issues of politics, religion, and other personal opinions? Do I treat others with respect and dignity that I expect from myself? Do I need to be right? That is such a huge issue, and I hope you're seriously asking yourself the question. At least amongst the men I work with, it's one of the central points of their hiccup in life, a need to be right. Or do I maintain a healthy, loving attitude? Raise your hand if you have comments, interpretations, experiences, certainly experiences with regard to the material of each of the traditions. I'll call on you in the order of your hands raised. I don't do much teaching, but I'll just give a little overview of my thoughts on the tradition. As I said, the tradition 10 protects us from the group weakness, just like the step 10, not tradition, step 10 in the 12 and 12. It's a spiritual axiom. Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. What about group disturbance? No opinion about outside issues. Singleness of purpose. I love the words citizens of the world. I'm not sure exactly where that was in my reading. And I have personal responsibility as a citizen of the member of the group. My constant chronic question in the last several years has been, how can I be more effective? I mean, we have the cure for cancer. That's not an exaggeration. Spiritual cancer. We, the 12-step community, has the cure for the cancer. Wow, what a responsibility. I'm assuming that you've had the experience of some renovation of your personality through the step process, some rehabilitation, some healing, whether or not you finished the steps, whether or not you're aware that you've had a spiritual awakening. Here you are. I affectionately said, I'm not sure it's on the recording, I called you mad dogs, affectionately. Who shows up on a Saturday to talk about the traditions? People who are really serious about their personal recovery and carrying that message to other people. So you're a very pre-selected group here of people who may not know, but they know enough that they do not know, and they want to know so that they can be more effective themselves in their own lives, but more effective in helping other people. There was a phrase that caught my attention this time as I was reviewing the material, that we have a spiritual message. That adjective, our message, carry this message, that's a spiritual message. And the word ambassador was used. Every one of us is an ambassador. And without talking, you've heard the preach the gospel wherever you are if you have to use words. A brilliant phrase. Preach the gospel wherever you are if you have to use words. But underneath that is be the gospel, be the truth, be the message, be the source of healing in the communities in which you participate. We're all very, very, very sensitive to the word pandemic, inoculation, contagious. We are. Every human being is contagious. You're transmitting who you are by just being who you are. Here's a question for meditation and challenge. What are you transmitting? Are you transmitting the darkness or are you transmitting the light? Doesn't matter what you're thinking, doesn't matter what you're feeling, doesn't matter what you're conscious of, you're transmitting. As long as you're alive, walking about, you're transmitting. Whew. I'll tell you what, that'll bring you to a level of consciousness, I hope. All right, so we've got some hands, wonderful. We'll start the discussion. As you know, we'll go about a half an hour. At some point, we might take a break. It'll be just based on you and my bio needs also. Brian, please.
Thank you, Herb, and good morning. And thank you for the comment on being here on Saturday morning. This is part of my serenity. So question on the transmitting energy. I know I had to check myself last night and this morning about walking around Walmart yesterday with a shopping cart and running into people. What kind of energy was I putting out?
Yeah. That's a consciousness. That's a wonderful consciousness. Go ahead.
Thank you for that, because there were some moments that were not positive. So anyway, the self-awareness, boy, you know, you've helped me in my self-awareness, and certainly the 12 steps have, and the behavior. In getting back to what you mentioned about Bill and the 12 traditions and his, do you think, you know, what hit me was his God-given discernment he was using at the time to structure this behavior? I mean, what a blessing for us today. And how the group and how we are supposed to behave. I mean, such a key part of the entire arena.
So yes, I'm not hearing a question though.
Do you believe it was Bill's God-given discernment he was using at the time?
Bill had, I'm not sure still what the question is, but Bill had a spiritual experience. We all know it. We've heard about it. We've read about it. It's on page 14 in the big book. And it's described even fuller in some of the AA literature, or if you hear him talk about it. At that point, he became a mystic from my interpretation. He had an intuitive connection to the source, which never left him. And the writing of the big book is clear evidence of that. Bill was not an educated man, certainly not in spiritual or philosophy or theology stuff or psychology. He did go to law school and he finished the law school. He never passed the bar, but he did get his diploma from his law school. So he's obviously bright and he was informed in that area, but he had no other exposure. And he writes the big book, which stands the test of any psychologist, theologian, philosopher, the internal integrity and the clarity of the process of human transformation. So maybe that's an answer to your question, because then my sense is, oh, he's a human being and we can talk about his frailties. But let's talk about the work he did and the resources he left us. That's how I evaluate. So I think the answer to your question, if I hear it correctly, is it inspired? That would be my conclusion, just personal. It's not official, but just personal. Was that addressing your question?
Indeed, yeah. And your elaboration on it, I think is right on. Yeah. Very profound. And you know, when I talk about the big book, for me, when I read it, it was next to the Bible. For me, it was the most inspiring book, bar none, I've ever read. I thought, how did somebody put this together 100 years ago? Now, there's many writings over the last 2,000 centuries that have been awesome writings, but I found it very relatable.
Well, and what you reminded me also that, yes, he was the author of the big book. I mean, there's no real question about that. He wrote the original manuscript, but it was processed through the group conscience. So there were 30 or 40 people with long-term sobriety, 6 months, when the manuscript was being written, and lithographed copies of it were distributed to Cleveland and Akron and New York, to the people who gave them comments and give them feedback. And Bill took those and integrated what he thought was relevant. So it was a process of group conscience that big book came together. So that adds another spiritual dimension to it, which he codified, of course, in the traditions. So that's a really good point, Brian.
Amazing. Well, I feel blessed. Thank you so much for
yeah. And well, I'll not make any more comment about that. Paul and Tennis, please.
Hi, I'm Tanis, and this topic is just really perfect for me right now. I did read a little bit where I had a group that I belonged to had an experience where a number of years ago there was a war going on, and someone in the meeting actually was from a particular country and that was involved in this war, and a newcomer came to the group that was from the other side.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was really, interesting. It was
at the very least.
yeah, it was really good because the woman who was from the other side did not share at all about being, from that other country and stuff, and actually was able to help that newcomer,
There you
and
go.
and
well, and that's really the point.
Right.
The traditions. How can I be helpful so I neutralize any of the stuff that's going to be a barrier for me to be helpful? That's brilliant.
Yeah. And now fast forward it to, there's all kinds of strife going on out there. And I actually have, my mother is from a country, her family is from a country and actually spoke the language, went to a school in Canada for it and all this stuff. And now that country is involved in strife, to say the least. And I started to share a little bit about that in meetings. And then about a month ago, someone that I sponsor mentioned how someone at another meeting that I attend had brought that into the meeting. And I was like, oh my God, I was doing that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to do that because I really feel strongly about it. And it's like my roots, my family roots have to do with it and stuff. And so it was really good. So I talked to this person that I sponsor about it, and she's going to bring, she hasn't yet brought it up because it was one person's sharing, but maybe at a business meeting we'll bring it up. But I think just reading the tradition again is really helpful, and I did suggest she read it. And I think too we were going to see what happens if this woman continues to do this, and she hasn't done it anymore. So we're we'd like to bring it up. Like I told her, you got to be careful how you bring things up sometimes, not to antagonize people, and how I have a hard time with that because I was, I really, take heart when people are when people put other people down and stuff. And so just getting to be here and once again review this, I think it's going to be really helpful. So thank you.
Well, you're right on the money with that. I made a note to bring it to this particular point of discussion about wearing buttons and or slogans or hats and or bumper stickers.
Yeah.
These are all potential obstacles to people finding us useful. I mean, even a bumper sticker, when I don't have bumper stickers, but people who drive into the parking lot, then other people who are coming in, perhaps a newcomer, and they see some kind of slogan or bumper sticker that's either political or religious, or as you say, and they might just drive away. But oh, hell, this is a group of right wingers or left wingers or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and that's we. I've had to, especially previously in some election cycles, remind people that it's inappropriate for them to wear the button that they're wearing, and they were unconscious of it because they wear it wherever they go, so they just came into the meeting with it not really thinking, but as soon as you bring it to their attention, they go, oh well, of course. I mean, most people anyway. Some people
Yeah.
and you're right about how you approach people. Yeah. I'm not known, however, for my subtleties.
Yeah. Well, and like the person that did this, I have a lot of respect for, you know, not, you know, and it's like, and I did the same thing in another meeting. So it's like, you know, I was just really glad that this person brought it to my attention. And
Oh, but see, you have an open mind for that too. You were able to go, oh, rather than defend it, you examined it. Yeah, I wanna, go ahead.
One of the things that I had written down here in one of my books here, where is it? It's I had written down here a while back to ask the question, what does that have to do with Al-Anon or AA?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, like in the moment, what does that have to do with Al-Anon or AA?
Yeah.
You know,
or my and our addiction, or my and our recovery.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Those are wonderful questions to examine. For instance, people who talk about, I'm a recovering Catholic. You hear it all the time. Really? I mean, is that really relevant here? Or making some type of a mean-spirited, or maybe any joke about in the AA meetings about Al-Anon. Really? Is that, I'll use the term kosher, is that really in the spirit of helpfulness? Recently, I've been aware of an acronym. You may have heard it many times already, but I've just been exposed to it. WAIT, W-A-I-T. Why am I talking?
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's such a brilliant, pause, right? Why am I talking? Or why am I about to talk? You in the meetings, you see people raising their hands, right? And that's great. That's how meetings are run. But I ask myself, what's my motive? What's really, am I grandstanding? Am I, going to be a teacher? Or am I going to witness to some type of insight that might be brought to the group, that an experience that would be helpful at the moment because of the topic being discussed? And mostly I've made a decision, because of the role I play both in AA and in the community, to not ever raise my hand. Now, that I'm not suggesting that. I'm absolutely not suggesting that to you. But for me, I mean, I'm so visible all the time that it's better for me not to be so, how you say, proactive, if you will.
Well, I actually have to practice that too in some of my meetings, because I tend to, because I have been in Al-Anon for quite some time, and there's times where people, like, for a while there, would like, oh, what does Tanis have? And it's like, no, just, or people will contact me after a meeting and say, hey, I had this problem with and I said, well, talk to so-and-so, talk to them about it,
All right. Well, all right. Yeah. And those are judgment calls, and you talk to your teacher, mentor, sponsor, whoever is giving you a sounding board. And also in prayer, my own spiritual director said, Herb, you have some information and you have some experience. And so never let your concern for your ego get in the way of being helpful. But be
Right.
concerned about your ego.
Right.
Never let up on your concern for your ego.
Yeah.
But never let your concern get in the way of being helpful. There's a balance. That's why I talk about balance. Yes, it's my constant, like every day. What does balance mean for me today? Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tanis.
Thank you.
Could I check in real quick, Paul? Alcoholic. Yeah, this is really good discussion. And you mentioned earlier about the linkage between step 10 and tradition 10. And this, or the tradition, this is a very strong one for me, right? Because the call out for step 10 is to pay attention. And that's what this is all about. It's paying attention, having discernment, having peripheral vision, listening, all those tools.
I like that. Having peripheral vision. That gives us a sense of our surroundings and our community. That's a wonderful phrase, Paul. Thank you for introducing it here. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. And I think not so much the politics, but I guess it was a couple months ago now, we were talking about tradition 6, and that was not a gut punch, but like, wow, it was an awareness, because I'm just so naturally eclectic, and I was just bringing all kinds of stuff everywhere, and it's not necessarily appropriate for AA, right? It's like, oh, it's fine to quote the Dalai Lama in AA, or whoever, and it's like, maybe not. And I
believe that it's not appropriate, because it's a slippery slope. Most everybody would be neutral with regard to the Dalai Lama or Nelson Mandela or these very public, broad neutral people. But then what criteria would you use for somebody saying, and my spiritual higher power is Jesus Christ?
Yeah, Karl Marx, whoever, right?
Okay. Well, there you go too. Yeah. Or
so it was a good call out, and it's very close to, these traditions are very closely aligned with each other. It was very helpful. So
yeah. Well, and the principle that at least I'm operating on right now for tradition 10 is stay mission focused.
Yeah. Mission
focused. The tradition's very clear that the primary purpose of a meeting is to carry its message. Well, what is the message of the meeting?
Yeah.
Right.
And it will differ probably for geographical reasons or gender reasons or particular age and stage reasons. Each group has its own kind of charism, if you will. That's a fancy word for a mission or purpose or meaning.
A vibe, yeah. You mentioned the 12 traditions illustrated, and the 10th tradition's great. It's these guys having a brawl in the meeting, right? But
I've actually seen that.
yeah, it's really cool. But
I don't mean the illustration. I've seen brawls in meetings.
Yeah, I've seen a bit of that too. Yeah. But the whole takeaway is, so these guys are fighting in the meeting, and there's a new guy walking away saying, how could anyone get sober or stay sober in an outfit like that?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Herb.
You bet. Bob, please.
Yes. Well, now I think would be a good time to quote Mussolini. No.
Do you remember how he ended up?
Yes, I do. I never looked at a street lamp the same again. I just wanted to say that it just is a little bit of a personal remark here, is if it weren't for tradition 10, you and I would never have met, and my life would be much, much poorer knowing what I know now about you and having.
Well, what does that mean, Bob? I mean,
because if I had walked into one of these meetings, one of the first few meetings I went into, and they had been an anti-alcohol group.
Oh,
Right. Because it says somewhere, and I can't find the quote, we are not a temperance organization.
Right.
And that is very important.
Right.
That we're not an anti this or anti that or anti anything.
Right. Right.
Because
yeah,
I would walk.
Well, and in the big book someplace, I don't know where it is either, Bill says, if you are expressing your negative attitude toward alcohol, you're not going to be helpful to people.
Correct.
Because they think you're some kind of nut. And quite frankly, you would be.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this has just been a great, it's worth the price of admission so far, which was cheap, I might add. You might want to bump your price up a little.
For you, I'll send you a special bill.
I will send you a special check because this reminds me and I made a note, so helps me to remember when I write things down. Don't talk politics or religion or economics when engaged in any AA activities of any sort.
You know, that's broader than the tradition letter, but I do believe it is encompassed in the tradition spirit. And I 100% agree.
Yep. Yep. Even if I'm talking to somebody out in the parking lot outside a meeting, we're going to be, oh, look, we got the same points of view and all this. You know what? Let's just leave opinions out of this experience.
Yeah.
And
there might be a place for, with colleagues or friends, that you have a discussion about outside issues. Of course, we're human beings, and that's part of the social connection. But we need to be very circumspect about that. Who's in the group? If there's a newcomer there, it just probably is better not said.
Yeah, it's also, you know, being opinionated, right? Which means expressing your opinions. You're going to have them no matter what.
Correct.
You can try and damp it down, but you're going to have your own opinions.
Right.
But vocalizing them, it's just another outlet for egotism. Right.
And that's the yellow flag for all of us.
Yep. As we are supposed to be, deflating the ego at depth. I think that's
at least to be conscious of it. And the yellow flag is just caution. That's all. We don't have, Bill was very clear. We don't have any rules.
Yeah.
We have no laws. We have no regulations. And he said it, and I'll quote it. You've heard me say it before, because it's a brilliant dichotomy. There's only two disciplines. One is God and one is alcohol. One is God and one is our addiction. We're either going for one or they're going for the other. That's the complete sentence he used. We're either going toward the light or we're going toward the darkness. There is no in between. The dimmer switch is either going up or the dimmer switch is going down. It doesn't rest. Yeah,
right.
That's a pretty dramatic statement, actually.
It is. Well, or in Texas terms, the only things in the middle of the road are yellow stripes and dead armadillos.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
I love the Texas, you know, that it's earthy. It's right there. It's right. Yeah. There's very little room for interpretation. Thanks, Bob, very much.
Okay, move along. Nothing to see here.
I can manage myself, Bob. Ashley, please.
Hi, Herb. Hi, everybody. Thank you for so great listening to you all. So yeah, you know, with this step, and I really love how you tie it to, you know, the principles and how you tie it to the steps with the tradition. And, you know, because resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, and fear will crop up. So they're gonna crop up in the group. It's reality, you know. And so I wanted to talk about 2 points. I want to read something from the grapevine from September 1948 on this tradition. And then I wanted to connect that to some of the writing in the 12 and 12, one particular sentence. So being like other men and women, how can we expect to remain forever immune to these perils? Probably we shall not. At length, we must meet them all. We cannot flee for them, nor ought we try. If these challenges do come, we shall, I'm sure, go out to meet them gladly and unafraid. That will be the acid test of our worth. Our best defense, this surely lies in the formation of a tradition respecting serious controversy so powerful that neither the weakness of persons nor the strain and strife of our troubled times can harm Alcoholics Anonymous. We know that AA must continue to live, or else many of us and many of our fellow alcoholics throughout the world will surely resume the hopeless journey to oblivion.
And that's really the point. That right there is really the point, that the integrity and clarity, and I'll say purity of the message will be tarnished by any of these other kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, it couldn't be more relevant than in today's environment.
Exactly. And so something along with this that I have noticed, I've been gifted with, humbly, is the way in which this is spoken about. It's not just that it exists, it's the way that people address it. And
I'm not sure what you're saying.
So I'll read a sentence to help me clarify. On page 177 of Tradition 10, let us reemphasize that this reluctance to fight one another or anybody else is not counted as some special virtue which makes us feel superior to other people. So I'm talking about, if I mention this tradition, the way in which I mention it, not like I'm better than you for knowing this tradition.
Oh, yes.
Or this gives me some sort of step to get just a little above you.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
I can see down. Shouldn't you know better? Let me remind you. And then that ties in.
I only really want to help.
The Al-Anon. Let me help. Let me help you. And so this vigilance. And so, and one of a huge character defect of mine is rigid vigilance. So it's like having, that's why I love you say the way you say the guidelines and guardrails.
Yes.
Because it's a broad highway. We're gonna bump up against them.
Yes.
And sometimes I gotta look for like traffic this way, and I bump into things do happen, and so it's a practice. And then I
hope people are hearing that. I tried to emphasize that in my introductory comment, but sometimes we, zone out. But I want to highlight and underline and put a box around practice.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here. We're just getting some information, sharing some experience so that we can continue to be conscious and incorporate and practice. Yep. Thank you.
And so you write vigilance, watchfulness, keeping awake and alert, especially to feelings of being disturbed. These ill-at-ease feelings are signals that we are in self-will and out of alignment with reality as it actually is. So the group's out of alignment with reality as it actually is.
Yeah.
When we begin to exercise self-regulation, we correct our behavior, mold our mental faculties, and improve our moral character. My reaction to the group is out of alignment, my internal. But I love what you say. So this action, if people have not pulled up the way Herb writes these, the list of principles, I have them on my wall. It's really, really helpful to have. Yeah, like who has these on their wall? But he says daily practice of awareness of feelings using spot check inventory when disturbed and applying the suggested remedy for emotional realignment. Pray, talk, amend, help, which develops our conscience, which develops our group conscience.
Yes.
So that's what there's just in the introduction, you said, what is the principle? And you left out what you had added in your book on step 11, which is what is the invitation? So what is the invitation? And I think you nailed it. It's in silence and listening, like holding space for the varied opinions.
So I like that. So a lot of people hear the words, give yourself some space, give yourself some time for silence and that. And what you're saying, I love the phrase, hold the space open. It's like it's anti-current behavior and the social sort of norms is to, number one, be silent at all, but also then to hold a space and listen.
And not use that as a spiritual bypass to not have any accountability.
Oh, sure, of course, yeah.
You know, because I think that was the other thing that came up in reading that particular sentence that came out. Just the fact that I noticed that we're not supposed to fight. I don't want to get involved in whatever's going on. Like, I'm going to walk away from every situation. I'm going to walk away from, rather than being able to handle dissonance, you know.
And that's where sort of prayer and common sense come in, and maybe some guidance from experienced people. But that's the wait concept, that pause concept.
And when you are in business meetings of groups, when I'm in a business meeting of a group that has a healthy discussion, respectful of people, not tolerating, wanting to hear the others, wanting to hear all sides.
Ashley's talking about not her career business. She's talking about her 12-step fellowship business meetings.
Correct.
Yes. Just to be clear for people. Yeah.
Though, I mean, you can feel this level of maturity and just kind of a factual reality of what is, and that different viewpoints exist, and that's okay. And not only is that okay, it's encouraged for the health of the group. And that is what helps communication and open-mindedness and the dimmer switch going up as a group.
Light bulbs went off. And again, maybe I should be using weight right now. Why am I talking? It was more of an epiphany for myself, I guess. But I realized I'm spreading myself too thin. I need to focus on my primary, job, and never mind all this other stuff that I do. No wonder it's falling down. It doesn't have that focus. So, and I take it back to tradition 10 and AA and all the other, I'm an OA and I've also am a Al-Anon member. But yeah, I can see how things fall apart very, very easily and very quietly and with subtle, underpinnings. And then all of a sudden things fall apart and we're left there going, how did this happen?
Exactly.
So, that's kind of what was going through my mind. Like, as you guys are talking about, tradition 10 here, I'm thinking, holy crap. Okay, I see it now clearly, right, what's going on in my life and with my workplace right now.
Yeah.
Rein it in and get back to our focus.
Yeah.
And, for me, not just spread myself thin. And this is what I want to see, stay alive. This is where I need to put my energy.
But you see, that's spot on. Just to give you some reinforcement, that's spot on with what we're doing here. Your share is so totally relevant because it's your awareness, insight, epiphany right now, and experience of the application of these principles to your personal life. That's what we're doing here. It also reminds me of the awareness that I had with I think it's tradition 2, and this is really for you right now. Bill has a phrase there: the good may be the enemy of the best. The good. You see, you're good at many things. You just named off a few things that you're good at that are dispersing your energies. And therefore you've lost focus, and some parts of your life are crumbling because you're not paying attention to it, because you've lost a sense of priorities. All of these are wonderful, good things, but what's your best thing? And if it is your source of income and your job, then you need to build your priorities around that. And what I did, and I've shared it with people, but you may not have heard it. I did a list of all my activities, everything that took time. And I rank ordered it using 1 as the best, and then variations of the good, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. and then made a decision in prayer to eliminate everything that wasn't a one.
Wow.
Oh, it took me 3 months to disengage, but the freedom that I found and the focus that I found, now I do it annually.
Mhm.
Herb, could you repeat the categories you were saying, like how you do it? Just
Sure. Number one is what I consider to be the best, the gift that I have, the unique competency. That's number one. Number two might be I'm on the board of a mental health group. Number three is I might be called to go to speak at meetings that are a 2-hour round trip. Number four might be something connected to my family or my community, whatever. Number five, all good stuff. I was on the board of a advisory group for alcoholic priests. I mean, it couldn't be more relevant to my personal background, having studied to be a priest. I was able to bring, but then that time, 5 years I was on that board, that time had come to a conclusion, and I was just like hanging out there because it was fun and good, but I wasn't contributing in the way that I can here on Zoom workshops. So I resigned. That's what I mean. But it's all relative to your evaluation of your competencies and the levels of contribution of these other really good things. But especially as I got older, of course, my energy goes down, my resilience goes down, my stamina goes down. I mean, as you get older, it doesn't get better in that sense. Wisdom gets better, but a lot of other things don't. And so I have to, now on an annual basis, I adjust based on the criteria. Like, does that help us?
that is very helpful. The clarifying question was, so you might say, okay, here's the top 5 in family, here's the top 5 in recovery, and then only the ones across the multiple categories that you have chosen.
You're overcomplicating.
Okay.
Yeah, you're overcomplicating it. List out your activities and in some subjective way, give it an assigned priority. Is that a 1 or a 3 or a 5?
Oh, okay. Each one gets I get it.
Each
that was
one.
helpful.
Each
okay.
one gets a number.
Got it.
And then you might make a decision to keep the first 3.
Got
I made a decision to eliminate everything that got in the way of number 1.
Okay, now I'm clear. Thank you.
No, I'm glad you asked the question. It probably helped other people understand it also. But I'm coming back to Tracy now. Did that help, Tracy?
Actually, that was the best thing you could have said to me. The good may be the enemy of the best. I totally get it.
Well, you were so right for it because that's what your discernment was. That was what your question was. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Paul and Tanis, please.
Yeah. I just had a comment. Another indicator would be also, how does it affect my mental well-being?
Yeah.
You know,
right?
Because that's just really, I mean, I can really think I need to do all this other stuff. Okay, but how is it affecting me mentally?
Mentally, emotionally, physically, and socially. At one point, my wife said to me gently and kindly over a cup of coffee, I love all the work that you're doing in helping other people. Just remember, I'm an alcoholic too, and I need some time.
Hey, one more quick thing, talking about looking at ourselves and step 10, tradition 10, a few weeks ago, you helped me. There was someone in the meeting who I respect, but he started calling me Pastor Paul, and I didn't like it, right? And you helped me with that. And I was able to have a frank discussion, but talking about the mirror.
Privately, you had a private discussion.
Yes, yeah, I didn't,
Right.
But at the very same time, I was calling a kid Mazda Mitch. I was using nicknames too. And it was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Right.
That's right.
And of course, I had my own reasons for it entirely. You know, it doesn't matter, but I'm doing the same thing. And that's what's really so beautiful about this program is we're surrounded by mirrors. It's like invariably when when those things happen, it's I look at myself. I always think of you know, who was it, Peter or whatever. By the time the cock crowed 3 times, he'd already let his boss down, you know. And it's like, what did I do? And it's happened to me more than I can count.
Well, consciousness is not a constant. All right, that's the whole point. The whole point of step 11 is to improve our consciousness.
Yes.
And in step 10, Bill nails it. When we're disturbed, oh, I have some pain. What's that about? Oh, that's about my self-centeredness manifesting in this or that or that. And we know that because we've done a 4th step and we've taken full 100% responsibility for my reactions to life. Yeah.
I love that. And like you said, so you know, step 10 is to pay attention. It says thermostat. Why is it 90 degrees in here? And so and the way I sort of describe it, I take that fracture, whatever, to my higher power. What is that? I'm probably overthinking it, but what do I do with that in the 11th step then to connect with my higher power on that?
Well, and that's the suggestion, brilliant suggestion on Bill. We talk to God because we're powerless. That's the first recommendation. But the second recommendation is we talk to somebody else because we need we need to hear our own voice, and we need to hear somebody else's feedback, as you said, the mirror on the wall.
The mirror in the room. Talk to someone and make amends quickly if we've harmed someone.
Well, obviously translate it then into action, right?
Yeah. Very cool. Thanks, Herb.
Thank you. So continuing with our discussion of traditions 10, 11, and 12, we're going to talk about tradition 11, short form. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. I think they throw in TV these days. Long form. Our relations with the general public should be characterized by personal anonymity. That is, as a member of a particular 12-step program. Keep in mind the context here. We think AA ought to avoid sensational advertising our names and pictures as AA members, as a member of any particular 12-step fellowship, ought not be broadcast, filmed, or publicly printed. Our public relations should be guided by the principle of attraction rather than promotion. There is never need to praise ourselves. We feel it better to let our friends recommend us. Questions in the reflections. Tradition 11 is about being an attraction, allowing our behavior to advertise for the program. Do I walk the walk, model the attitude of a helpful person? Do I give unsolicited advice? Do I promote myself at the public level? Am I confident that the Spirit will carry the message to the places and people that are ready for it? The Spirit will carry it. All right. So some of my comments. I'm not clear as to any development there's been with regard to social media and the official position of the General Service Office. So if people who are in the service structure are familiar with that, I would enjoy your comments as to what the recommendations are in terms of social media and all of the electronic exposures that we've had, certainly since the COVID and the Zoom era. Just be clear on what anonymity means. It comes from the Greek word onyma, O-N-Y-M-A, which means name. And when you put an A-N in front of it, it means no name. That's all it means, no name. And there's a couple phrases that are used in the literature that I read. And it says, it's about individual invisibility. What a great phrase. Anonymity is about my invisibility. And that's to protect the group. But it made the very clear comment, we don't want AA to be invisible. In fact, we want our respective 12-step fellowships to be very visible. AA advertises. You'll find it in television ads. You'll find it in newspaper ads. You'll find it in magazine ads. Thank God. I hear all the time stories about people who saw some type of advertisement or reference, and that was the key that began their journey. It's kind of funny, those of you who know me and know the exposure that I have, that I'm talking about anonymity and personal invisibility. I mean, that's kind of like, yeah, not really. I got my sponsor, yeah, I know. My sponsor fired me at 28 years of sobriety. He unfortunately wasn't a very informed person with a perspective on the traditions and or the spirit of it all. And he came to me and he said, I just discovered you have a website, Herb. You're becoming way too visible. You need to take your website down or I can't work with you. I said, I've been expecting this and prepared for it. So I really enjoyed our 28 years. Thank you. I'm moving on now. Because I knew in my heart that my website is not there to promote me. It's there to make resources available to people who are connected to the work that we do in the 12-step work. When I published my first book, I went to the General Service Office and I said, so do I say just a member of a 12-step fellowship? Do I say Herb Kagan? Do I say Herb K? And after some discussion with them and their trustees and really knowledgeable people, AA General Service Office recommended that I use my first name and last initial. That's what I did. All right. Now there's obvious, well, maybe not obvious. There is some discussion. I almost said disagreement. No, there's some discussion in the rooms about the use of personal names. The New York from Bill Wilson culture says we use our first name and if we want to, our last initial. Dr. Bob's contingent out of Akron is very clear. Dr. Bob, in fact, is quoted in one of the books published by AA. If in fact you don't use your last name, you're breaking the tradition. I mean, diametrically different, because he said, how can people find Bob Smith, Bob S., even Bob Smith? All right. I wanted to make it easy for people to find, well, the big book, excuse me, not the big book, the literature from the 12-step General Service Office talks about you make your own decision as to the level of anonymity personally. But the letter and spirit of the 11th and 12th tradition are that you're invisible with regard to your connection to a 12-step program in public. So in the press, in the radio, in the television, I'm never Herb K., a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've said in my various publications that I'm a recovered or recovering alcoholic, depending on the circumstances. and that I've been a member of a 12-step fellowship, but I don't name it. That's as close as I come to it. Because what the spirit and the letter of, I believe, the traditions on anonymity is that we're not identifying ourselves in a particular fellowship. So it's very clear. I could go to the PTA, I could go to Congress, as long as there are reporters there that will respect, or no reporters, or report that they would never publish the name and or the picture of the person. Yeah. So it's, the letter is very clear. The spirit is what I embrace, way beyond the letter. I try to make sure that I cooperate with what I consider to be the spirit, and I'll get interpretations from informed people at the trustee level, people at the general service staff level, who deal with these kinds of questions all the time. There's a word sacrifice that's throughout the material on the tradition 11 and 12. It has if you understand where it comes from, it's a combination of two Latin words. No, this is important to kind of get the sense of what does sacrifice mean. I mean, you kind of know intuitively a little bit, maybe you've looked it up, maybe you have a religious background and you know some things about history. But it comes from two words, sacer, S-A-C-E-R, which means priest and or to make holy. Facere, F-A-C-E-R-E, which means to make or to create. Sacrifice, to make holy. Normally in the context of a religious ritual of some kind, where they sacrifice the lamb and or they burn the wheat and that kind of thing as an offering to the gods. I'm talking about organized religion of many thousands of years ago. That's where the word came in. Now here it's about the literally giving up our visibility, sacrificing our importance, our uniqueness, our image, our power, letting go and detaching from, in the context of both the 11th tradition, which is about public anonymity, and the 12th tradition, which is about personal anonymity. The word humility is used in the context of these discussions. And again, it comes, if you understand the word from the words from which it comes, the Latin word humus, H-U-M-M-A-S, I believe it's spelled, means earth or dirt. Essentially common as, not unique, not special, not outstanding, but blending into an environment. That's the spirit of, the meaning of. And so my wife never knew who I sponsored because I would never tell them. My sponsees don't know who I sponsor unless they get together or somehow accidentally figure it out. I mean, I take it to that level. It's not up to me to be connected to anybody publicly, meaning outside of myself and their relationship, even with my wife. Now, of course, when people would call and leave a voicemail, she would know who they are. But that's up to people who leave voicemails. I do not leave a voicemail that connects that person to a 12-step fellowship. I'll use a name, but not any reference to a membership in a 12-step fellowship, because I never know who's going to hear the voicemail. Again, it's about unity, it's about the common good, and it's about the deflation of my ego at depth. Bryant, please.
Hi, Herb. One thing I'm getting in all your meetings and your emotional sobriety platform, which I am embraced, had no desire to drink any longer. It was just all the other stuff. But you mentioned today,
it's all the other stuff that will bring you back to drinking if you don't deal with it effectively.
well, it brings me back to something, and which is not wholesome. And so the reactions to life, the issues of life, the reactions of life seems to be the paramount overriding theme in a lot of what you do, what you give us.
That's right.
And the behavior, what I'm hearing today is awesome about the meetings and the AA stuff, certainly what I'm involved in, and I don't, can you expound, and you do in every meeting, so I don't even know why I'm asking this, on the reactions of life? Even hearing everybody today, it's the reactions.
Yeah. Well, you're
my disturbance yesterday, and there was something bothering me. I could feel it and I knew it. And it's one reason is I didn't sacrifice myself to my spirit, to the Spirit of God yesterday, and sit down and read scripture. And when I don't do that and something's bothering me, let me tell you. So on my way to Walmart, and in Walmart, I was disturbed. And I knew it, but I didn't do anything about it. I did calm down. I didn't do anything to anybody, but I could just, my behavior and the how I showed up, and so that is my my other 10% of that's missing in my emotional sobriety platform. I'm about 80 to 90% there, but it's that other 10 to 20% that doesn't keep me down. I thank God for where I've gotten over the last 4.5 years, and Bill Wilson's letter and paying attention to what you put out there has been paramount in that. But the reactions to life, why is that so difficult? Is it just the ego and the image and our self-will?
Yes. Yes. The answer is yes to those questions. Yes. And Ashley said it. She was quoting from the big book. She said, watch for Bill's page 84. He's going into the 10th step. Watch for resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness when they crop up. I'm quoting. He didn't say if, he said when, because I think your percentages are right on the money, Brian. It's an intuitive evaluation that I think is a model for human beings, that we get to be 10 to 20% restless, irritable, and discontent periodically on a regular basis. 80%, 90%, we get some real stability over time, but we're never going to transcend our humanity. We're never going to transcend, be better than being human. And human means I'm flawed, and human means that I'll get tired, or I'll get hungry, or I'll get frustrated, or I won't have enough sleep, or there'll be something life going on in my circumstances that creates stress, and I'll react poorly. Yep, that's what the 10 steps all about. But you see, the really good news is you were conscious of being disturbed. It's not beating yourself up.
I was never, when I was drinking, I was never conscious. I thought I was.
Right.
I had no clue what that consciousness awareness was,
That's right. That's right.
And let me tell you, the gift and beauty of serenity is a treasure chest that I will never give up.
And it gets better, Brian. All right, it gets better. Now, some people say the road gets narrower, and it does, because we're operating on principles. But the theme of the meditation at the end of the 5th step, all right, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe, and in different places, broad and roomy, never exclusive, always inclusive. So these are both correct. Narrow because we're operating on principles, but broad and roomy because we're operating with freedom and consciousness of the principles.
You know, you talk about sacrificing, and when I sacrifice my will, even though my flesh doesn't want that, there's freedom in that. There really is. And I feel freer when I do that.
Because you're in the flow of reality rather than going at cross purposes to the flow. There's much more freedom, and we use the term sacrifice my will, meaning is I don't do what I want because what I want is dysfunctional. And I learned that by making mistakes and correcting them. And that's called wisdom over time. That's why that Serenity Prayer is so beautiful. And by the way, you made a comment about your exposure to my works tells you that I'm focused on life and reality and the circumstances as they manifest. That's a really nice insight that confirms exactly what my that priority number 1 is, focused on steps 10, 11, and 12, because it's the most overlooked and misunderstood matter or material in the big book and in the program of living. The first 9 steps are the program of recovery. Wonderful. But the program of living, steps 10, 11, and 12, because we're not cured of what you indicated, that unmanageability, that spiritual malady, that cancer of the soul. We're not cured of that. And we have a daily reprieve because we live daily. And we're daily human beings. And we will be disturbed. Now, I'm much less disturbed today than I was 25 years ago on a regular basis. But I'm not protected from being disturbed because I'm human. Last night, I was in a workshop with some treatment center people, and toward the end of the workshop and the end of my day, I'm not excusing it, I'm explaining it. One of the people said, well, what if I just don't want to do that? Well, I couldn't help myself. I said, well, then just suffer and die. Well, and I didn't say it as nicely as I just said it. I had an energy about it. I'm so frustrated and tired of the snowflakes. If you're suffering and you don't want to do what, you don't have to. But I could have been so much. Immediately I caught it. I said, wow, that was kind of direct and rough. And I apologize if, in fact, it sounded like there was too much energy in it. I immediately called it, named it, and called it out so that I just showed them I was human. But I had a reaction without any filters.
So has my daughter not spoken to me for 11 years because I'm human? I say that tongue in cheek.
Yeah, that's a discussion, that you should have with a psychologist and or with a sponsor and or if you want to have a conversation with me sometime. It's sad. I was connected to a man who died with like 45 years of sobriety, and one of his 8 children never did speak to him again. And this is a really good guy who made all the amends and did all the things. And, some of the damage that we do is irreversible.
Yeah, indeed. For me, I have to really be extra aware because, I've had different guys in groups, AA or at the mentorship group at church that I'm in, and just my physical appearance and demeanor. And my first wife told me this. She says, you intimidate people. I'm thinking, well, I'm not doing anything.
Well, not consciously.
Yeah. And I think it's just So I really have to be extra
Correct.
vigilant to smile more and do things, because
Correct. That is
just
correct.
my presence may be throwing off an aura that I'm disturbed.
Yes.
You know
That
what I
is
mean?
correct.
And I really had to become more aware of that. You know, to grow.
Yes.
Grow.
Yes. I want to be helpful. Yeah. When I'm smiling, I'm much more approachable. Because I've got beady eyes and I've got a bald head, and I can have a tone that's kind of fierce sometimes. So I have to be very conscious and pay attention like you do. Yeah.
Thank you, Herb. Good meeting today.
Well, you know, unconscious people don't think and talk like that. So congratulations on being conscious.
Well, you know, I thank God for the gifts he's given me,
That's right.
because I never want to throw those away.
That's right. That's right. Well, and yeah, and you'll enjoy your life and the people around you much better as you do. Thank you so much, Brian. Ashley, please.
Thanks, Herb. I want to quickly go to bat for you and say that I think you respect people enough to know what they're capable of. And I think that's sometimes where your quickness or frustration comes from, because you're capable. I'm speaking to this because I know how capable you are. Like, I know what's the wealth of the wellspring of possibility that lies within you. So you respect someone enough to speak to them directly. The tone, I do it too. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having an Al-Anon slip.
Thank you for letting me. It felt good. Ooh, I got in there. Okay, so and I wanted to go to the forward to the 3rd edition, where it says this, in spite of the great increase in size and the span of this fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal.
Yeah.
Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And so I feel like in this tradition, the other thing it's barring against is this kind of mass media message, because of the simple and personal, and I'll say intimate nature of connecting. And, I wanted to be asked questions. I wanted to be seen. And I feel that in the spiritual malady, connecting another alcoholic by being, or another UA, or under earner or Al-Anon, is essential. So if I may, could I read another blurb from the
somehow maybe I've not heard it or I've missed it, but what is the point here? What is it you're addressing?
Oh, I'm saying that in trying to kind of the public relations person at press, radio, and film, by making it about me, I'm assuming that I'm the right person to connect with all these people. And it has to happen on an individual basis.
The spirit of helpfulness is certainly one-on-one. Absolutely. Yeah.
Correct. So I'm just saying that it feels forcing when there's just something that feels, maybe I'm getting lost here, but that was my point, was that somehow the simple and personal nature, when you're not being attracted, like someone being attracted to someone is simple and personal.
Yep.
Or so.
All right, so go with whatever it was you were going to read.
Okay, thank you. This probably will do a much better job. Good public relations. Oh, and so the other thing I was going to say is I'll just read. The good public relations are AA lifelines, reaching out to the alcoholic who still does not know us. For years to come, our growth is sure to depend upon the strength and number of these lifelines. One serious public relations calamity could always turn thousands away from us to perish, a matter of life and death indeed. And prior to that, it says, Providence has been looking after public relations of Alcoholics Anonymous. It can scarcely have been otherwise. Though we are more than a dozen years old, hardly a syllable of criticism or ridicule has ever been spoken of AA. Somehow we have been spared all the pains of medical or religious controversy. And it goes on, but the thing that's interesting is that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And the levels of recovery that used to be so high aren't, because the message isn't transmitted in the way I think that it originally was sometimes.
I don't think that's at the public level at all. I think the public level has been very supportive. Sure, there's lots of challenging attitudes in our culture today, but I do believe that the message was being delivered by individuals more effectively in the past. And since probably the early 70s, the message has really gotten garbled because of treatment center and psychology interaction with the recovery community. And I asked one of the senior leadership at Hazelton about 5 years ago, I said, so when did meetings become the program? You understand the question? So many people think that meetings are the program. I mean, they don't know that they don't know. It's not it's just not knowing. And when I asked that question, this person didn't hesitate. They said 1976. And I said, good Lord, what happened in the mid-70s? He said, that's when business and the treatment centers discovered that there was a business here. And they took the drunks directly into treatment, released them after treatment, after they were sober 30 to 90 days. And they said, go to meetings, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Great direction. But unfortunately, the people in the meetings said, keep coming back to the meetings. And the big book and the steps were not part of the culture at the time, where people were directed to use the book as the textbook and the steps as the process of transformation to a spiritual awakening. At least this is my interpretation. And fortunately, in the 80s, it began to turn around, and now there is a movement within the 12-step communities, all of them, coming back to the big book and the steps since the 80s, and the focus back on the textbook and the precise direction. So that, at least that's my long answer to your observation. I don't believe it's the public media that is the problem.
It says, shot in the arm methods are not for us. Immediate results will always be elusive because easy shortcuts to notoriety can generate permanent and smothering liabilities. More and more, therefore, we are emphasizing the principle of anonymity as it applies to our public relations. We ask of each other the highest degree of personal responsibility in this respect. As a movement, we have been before now tempted to exploit the names of our well-known public characters. We have rationalized that other societies, ever the best, do the same. As individuals, we have sometimes believed that the public use of our names could demonstrate our personal courage in the face of stigma, so lending power and conviction to news stories and magazine articles.
But that was written when?
48.
Yeah. 1948, AA had not even confirmed its own traditions yet. They were confirmed in 1950. And yes, and that in that early age and stage, all of that was true. None of that's true today.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
None of that's true today. In fact, almost the opposite in the public image, and you see it in the serials and the films and whatever else on TV and or interviews with lots of visible people, that it's almost a badge of courage. It's almost like a social climber wants to be in a 12-step program. Oh my God. Yeah. What 12-step program are you in, and who's your psychiatrist? Oh geez. Anyway, that's my sense of it anyway. Yeah. But there's well, the reason we're doing this is in fact to help people have a broader understanding of information like the tradition, so that we can in fact bring that to our own environment and our own 12-step communities, so that we can be the leaven in the bread and help spread this, I would say, this maturity, helping people grow in understanding of these principles. So thanks, Ashley. Paul and Tanis again, please.
Yeah, I just have a super quick observation. Tanis has a thing, but I thought it was so interesting. You mentioned Dr. Bob wanting to use a last name. That really surprised me, because he had, they'd always say that, Bill Wilson would have sold the whole thing and Dr. Bob wouldn't have told anyone. I mean, he was so much more conservative. I just found that really interesting that he had that pragmatic, intention. Well, how do they find us? So that was it.
Yeah. It helped me have intelligent conversations with people who brought up the controversy or potential controversy of the use of last names and or last initials and or first names. And it resolved it, because AA said, you choose. AA, I mean, in terms of their published literature, they said, here are the two orientations. One comes from the East Coast, one comes from the Midwest. Both valid, both coming from co-founders. You choose how you want to be identified, how you want to identify yourself in a meeting. I personally do not use my last name in a meeting. I'm in meetings where people use their last name, because that's a growing inclination among some people, at least in Southern California. And I don't do that. I don't use my last initial, Herb K. I do in terms of the work that I do in a public forum and on my literature, my books, and my resources. But personally, I'm Herb. I'm an alcoholic, and I keep it really simple. For instance, and thank you for bringing this up, because it reminds me that there are people who say I'm a recovered alcoholic. It is true, but it is potentially creating controversy, because there are people who don't understand recovered. No, we're in recovery, or we're recovering. And that creates a controversy, and it's based on lack of information again. So why do people say I'm a happy alcoholic, or I'm a grateful alcoholic? I mean, why do you have to be different? That's my motive. Excuse me, that's my question about people who do something differently. Maybe it's brilliant. Maybe it brings some attention. Like I say, substitute for the word powerless, the word no choice. I do that so that people will wake up to the implications of the word. But why does somebody say, I'm Herb Kagan? Why does somebody say, I'm Herb, a grateful alcoholic? I'm a recovered alcoholic. Why does somebody make themselves different?
I'm an alcoholic and an addict. That was, when I was new.
Well, that's another thing. Clancy was great. He says, I'm an alcoholic, not a and anything. And no. It's like singleness of purpose, and again, the invisibility of the individual, not the invisibility of the program. I mean, those were words that caught my attention this journey through preparing for our discussion today.
I love that translation. You know, for a long time, it's like tradition 11, it's relevant if someone's putting a microphone in my face, but it's so much more than that. There's so much more depth.
Well, and even when you're putting a microphone in your face, the whole point of it is that you don't identify personally as a member of a specific 12-step program. Yes, I'm in a 12-step program would be legitimate from my standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous would not be legitimate.
Right on.
Now, somebody might think that that's too gray of a, and it might be, but I would hold the position that at the public level, press, radio, television, at that level of public, then it's about my not identifying as a member of a specific 12-step program. So that in fact, I'm not connected at the public level with that specific program in the event that I would relapse and besmirch the program.
Which has happened, right? Yeah.
Of course.
Yep.
Right. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
I had something here. The last paragraph on the AA 12 and 12, it says, this in brief is the process by which AA's tradition 11 was constructed. To us, however, it represents far more than a sound public relations policy. It is more than a denial of self-seeking. This tradition is a constant and practical reminder that personal ambition, and I had written down below there, in the program and service and sponsorship, has no place in AA. It is each member becomes an active guardian of our fellowship. And I had a notation here, the we in this program includes God, and to see step 11 and to look at the process and learning to work with others, including doing things with others, i.e. not doing commitments by myself, getting others involved. And to me, that's being inclusive, you know, and to apply this tradition even in working with others, you know, to not have to take personal a pat on the back personally, you know.
Well, and just quick, the 11th tradition illustrated said we must be ever aware that self-appointed messiahs speaking for AA through public media can do us a great damage. But that notion of self-appointed messiahs, that's
right.
That's the admonishment of the not named part of it. You know, anonymity is not doing it for personal gratification, but it's tough. You know, like you said earlier, to not let mixed motives keep me from heading north. You know. Right.
Yes, that's where accountability constantly is my best friend. Talking to somebody transparently about what I'm thinking, feeling, and doing, so that I have that mirror that you talked about that will reflect back to me the truth, because they really want the best for me. They're not going to just co-sign me to get my approval.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you let your sponsor go at 28, Herb. I probably wouldn't have met you otherwise. Seriously. You said you knew in your heart of hearts what the right thing was.
Right. Yeah. I had been preparing for it. I knew I had outgrown him and I was seeking other support. And I actually had been working with a guy for a couple of years, once a month, meeting with him, telling him he's on the bench. I'm going to call him up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Brian, please.
What does on the bench mean?
In baseball, when somebody is on the bench, they're in the lineup to be called up. They might be in the Los Angeles spring team, but they're not on the Los Angeles Dodgers, but they're being trained to be called up from the minors to the majors.
Got it. You know, thank you for mentioning keep it simple. I'm Brian and I'm an alcoholic, because my ego wants to expand that.
That's the point.
certainly based on the work I've done over the last 4.5 years, it wants to expand it even further.
Yeah.
So, if I keep it simple, it adds a good layer to it. My sponsor, my first year in AA, he told me, he said, Brian, because I had a lot of opinions and a lot of questions. He said, keep your opinions to yourself. It makes things easier. And I believe that. And I equate that to the word wait that I learned a couple of weeks ago from you. Why am I talking? Yeah, sometimes I have to ask myself, why am I talking? Some of the things I'm hearing discussed today is where, the people here are trying to go in the right direction of the traditions and principles of AA is, what is my intention if I want something?
What does that mean?
What is underlying that, ego and dysfunctionality of what we're learning today? What is my intention?
Oh, yes.
If I want something?
Oh, when, not if.
When, yeah. No, if, it's not if, it's when. Yeah, it's going to happen.
Exactly.
What is my intention? And I think you've chatted about that previously, haven't you?
Oh, constantly. Yes. If you've listened to me, you've heard that, because intention is that consciousness that I'm forever talking about, because this is what makes us human, and more human the more conscious that we are. And it's all about intention. What's my intention? And that's the motive, and that's the feeling, and that's the reason that we're moving in any direction or want to. Thank you. Thanks very much, Brian. Well, let's move on to the 12th tradition. And the short form is anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. Whoa, all right. Tradition 12 is the foundation. It's interesting, in the big book, Bill says step 12 is the foundation stone. You see, there's a correlation here. It really helps you understand the spirit, I believe, of each tradition when you connect it to the essence of each step. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities, to operate on what's the principle? That's one of the key questions that I have in a discussion with somebody I'm trying to help. Eventually, what's the principle that is operating here? Is it simplicity? Is it honesty? Is it fidelity? Is it integrity? What is the principle? Because once you ferret out the principle underneath, as Brian was just saying about motives and intention, it becomes very clear as to what the suggested action is. Long form. And finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity, invisibility, has an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we are actually to practice genuine humility. There's the connection. This is the end, that our great blessings may never spoil us. Fabulous sentence here. That we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of him who presides over us all. That we shall forever live, this is our consciousness, in thankful contemplation, gratitude, and awareness of the presence of power, who presides over us all. All right, here's the meditation. Tradition 12 is about humility. Do I harbor feelings of being unique and special? Always. Do I foster a perspective of being one among many? Never. Do I have an unhealthy need for attention? Always. Am I presenting the message or the messenger? Always the messenger. I hope you're hearing the humor in what I'm saying. Some humor. Do I practice personal gratitude by living in thankful contemplation of God who presides over us all? One of my constant sort of sources of contentment is to bring in this sense of like I'm better than a fish in water, but I am surrounded by, I am saturated by, I am completely immersed in the presence of this power. And when I can think this way and pause and be very aware of the reality of this, it usually manifests itself in some better behavior. That's how I sort of warm myself up to my morning meditation practice. Well, there was a lot of stigma. This tradition was written prior to 1950, approved in 1950. And at that time, there was a lot of stigma. So it had a particular meaning that it doesn't have necessarily as big an impact today in terms of the stigma in the culture. But it was also very practical because there was such an overwhelming need and such a small number of people to help. But they also didn't have a sense of trust in terms of the meetings. It was very much like speakeasy times. You had to know somebody to find a meeting. In fact, mostly you had to be taken there and the knock on the door and it's Charlie and I'm bringing Al and he's okay. I mean, it was literally that secretive a community in the 30s, and then obviously once the book was published, it became much more public and readily available. And part of the spirit of the 12th tradition, I believe, and the 12th step is asking yourself constantly, or having this as one of your driving motives, what are the opportunities to be helpful? I jettisoned or threw away the word service a long time ago. It's a wonderful word, but my meditation said it's too sophisticated. Use the word helpful. How can I be helpful? Because that applies not only to the 12-step community, but to your family community, to your church community, to the community of friends and neighbors, and at work, for instance. How can I be helpful? Chuck C's new pair of glasses really helped me create that and hold that attitude. How can I help you do what you need to get done was his motto. How can I, and he meant that from no sense of getting credit or manipulation or benefit. How can I help you do what you need to do? If you have any desire to improve your understanding of unconditional love, a great phrase, overused. But if you want to dig down underneath it, look up the word altruism. Doing something for the benefit of somebody else with no possible benefit for yourself. I think it pretty well nails it. It's an action, doing something for somebody else with no possible benefit to yourself. That's why I also in sponsorship love the image of lantern. The lantern literally is almost invisible. It's the light that is transmitted through the lantern that is the purpose of the lantern. And I think that is a wonderful symbol of sponsorship, and it kind of keeps us in the middle road when we're wanting to be helpful and sponsor and or have some visibility, trying to maintain this attitude. I'm the lantern. I need to keep the lenses of the lantern clean so that the light shines out. I'm not the light. The purpose of the lantern is to be a conduit, a channel of the light. Again, going back to the initial perspective of the purpose of the 12 traditions, which is unity. The whole point of each of the traditions and all of the traditions is unity, so that the group will sustain its existence and not be torn apart by individual egos or the group's ego. You've heard many times, I'm sure, people talk about different groups, either in a very positive or a very disparaging way. Positive meaning that it's overly inflated. Like, if you don't go to this group, you're not doing AA correctly. All right. Roger, please. Good to hear from you. Good to see you always.
Thanks, Herb. Alcoholic Roger in sunny Southern Ontario. Anyhow, I think this anonymity as a spiritual foundation, it's kind of an amazing concept, and I've learned a lot more about it over time. I used to think that it meant in relation to my name, my person.
Yes.
But now I realize that it's so much more than that. It is in relation to all those things that feed my ego.
Yes.
Like when I came into the program, I wanted to tell you how much money I had made in the past.
Right.
What kind of car I was driving.
Right.
How much education I had. How beautiful all of my ex-wives were. All of these types of things that needed external validation to feed my ego. So now I resist that as a practice of humility. My humility tells me I need help.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter about any of those things because they don't really matter. They're not permanent. And what I say and what I want to tell you, I'm not going to, because it only matters really what I'm doing, not what I'm going to tell you that I'm going to do, or what I used to be, or what I am. So it's really a wonderful thing. This anonymity is the spiritual foundation of the program.
Well, and you're talking about the spirit of the tradition. The letter is wonderful, all right, and it's great, and it's a guideline, but the spirit, that's really important to sort of sense out, and I think that's what you're talking about, in that sense of humility. You just said two wonderful words that I think would be, again, like the WAIT acronym. These two wonderful words would be great criteria, is what am I saying and why am I saying it? I think that would be a wonderful filter. Again, I hear people talking about how many people they sponsor, or how many meetings they go to, or I mean, all kinds of, and it's like they're completely unconscious that they're just putting medals on their shoulders to become the general of AA. Well, at least this is my evaluation. Certainly not a judgment, but it's my evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. And did I learn quickly when I first came into the program how refreshing it was to go to the so-called AA parties where it was other AA members who were there. And nobody asked me what I did for a living.
Yes.
Or how much education I had, or how much money I had.
Usually,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that would, yeah, it is refreshing that can be the way it can be.
Right. Well, I mean, you're bringing up a point. My home group acknowledges a couple people in the room for being a doctor. They call him Dr. Tom. Why don't you tell us? Or Lawyer Tom. Why don't you tell us? And it's kind of like, it's just not appropriate.
And maybe that person wearing the clerical collar shouldn't be referred to as an authority either, who's sitting in the meeting wearing that dress. That's something that bugs me, and maybe it shouldn't bug me, but it does.
Well, no, I think it would appropriately irritate me if a clergy person came in reflecting clergy, that they're wearing a Roman collar. Totally inappropriate for lots of reasons. Are you signaling that you're different and better than? Or are you in fact preventing yourself from being a source of helpfulness because somebody won't approach a priest even though they want to because of what you say. No, I could have a very healthy conversation about that.
Yeah. The first group to which I belonged in Toronto was more a group where people would talk before and after the meeting about who had the new Mercedes or the new Bentley or the
yeah,
new
well, that's,
BMW
is that a
in the
men's stag
driveway.
meeting?
Yeah, no, it was a mixed meeting.
All right.
And then there's another sort of a semi issue that there are some groups where everybody has to wear a suit, and probably lots of newcomers, even if they wanted to,
right,
wouldn't be able to and might get put off by that. So there's all kinds of things like that.
There's a group here in our area that suggests very strongly and shames you if you don't follow it, that you wear a suit if you're a man, and you have a tie, in fact, and you wear a dress if you're a woman, and there's no facial hair if you're a man. And it's kind of like, really?
I think that group I know of begins with the letter P.
and it's probably toned down a lot than when it was originally created. And by the way, I send people to that group because they're very successful in getting hardcore drunk sober because of the structure and the emphasis on sponsorship. So I don't ever criticize them, and my comments weren't critical. I'm just saying that they're not helpful if in fact they have any rules. I wonder what all-inclusive, never exclusive means. Yeah, thank you. Anything else, Roger?
No, thanks. I mean, it's just a reminder still to me to not judge these other people and just to do what's right for me.
Yeah. It's human nature to judge. This is how we survive. Is it safe or not? All right. Is it part of a community that I want to be connected to or not? It's in our nature to be judgmental. And yet this is an area where we have to discern what part of that is ego and unhealthy. Yeah. And that's, I jokingly use the term, I don't judge, I evaluate. But that's a cover, of course. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks.
Ashley, please.
Thanks, Herb. I wanted to, I really wanted to thank Paul for saying, don't let mixed motives keep me from heading north. Boy, does that help my Al-Anon mind from overthinking.
And the perfectionist.
Yes.
That's right. No. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wanted to share some personal experiences with this, and it just linked right at this moment is, maybe 10 years ago, I was at a wedding and I met someone and I said, what do you do? And he said, let's not do this. And it was like, we ended up having a relationship after that. But the initial meeting was not this, like, let's give our stats, let's size each other up. It was so freeing. The space I felt in my body, it was like, we're going to connect right here, right now.
Yeah.
Like it just opened a whole level.
Well, and part of the motive for doing the stats up front is most people are socially awkward, and it's an easy way to begin a conversation. It's not necessarily an ego thing. It's just like, this is stuff we know about and can talk about very easily and kind of like get kind of a rhythm going. I think that was particularly brave of this person in a new sort of acquaintance to say, oh, let's not do this. I love that.
Yeah, because I think also it showed him that he was picking up on the mechanized nature of me doing that.
There.
He
I think that's a great phrase. The mechanized nature. We go into brain dead because it's easy. Nice.
Or it's just been, it's habitual, it's not even conscious, and I wasn't conscious. The second he said that, I was right there,
Exactly. Yeah.
And
not offended or defending.
Not
them.
at all.
Yeah.
No, and it wasn't that this, and the strange thing about it, this person really didn't have anything to hide. It was the exact opposite,
Right.
And then another thing is I've recently found this app that matches people for accountability, where all you do is you show up and you co-work with people, and these are strangers, and your first name and last initials listed, and you show up and you're there for a purpose. You announce what you're going to do. The time passes. It's literally 15 to 30 seconds, and at the end of the time it ends. And the anonymity of that, I mean, it's just.
What's the purpose of that?
Oh, the purpose of that is so I can get my step work done. So I can get the purpose of, but I was saying the thing that anonymity, when I don't have anything to prove, when I just show up as a person, I can connect in ways that I didn't see before.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to prove something.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to draw attention to your way of life document. I know it wasn't listed as a resource, I believe, for this.
Right.
But this profile of a sponsor, this is profile of a human being. This is
of a decent human being. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I look at this and it's not what I want to get from someone.
Yeah.
And that's what I think that the 12th step is. It's how I want to be.
Yeah. Nice.
I think this is profile of Ashley, how Ashley wants to be.
Nice.
Because otherwise I'm looking for, this person's not doing this. This person's not doing this.
Right.
And when I say, how can I do all these things?
Right.
And
it's not meant to be a profile in terms of this is who I am going to be in a perfectionist sense. These are sort of ideals that were given as suggestions from people who had successful relationships with sponsors, and they said this is the ingredient that made it a successful relationship, and I put those down as a list that the person on that list could not possibly exist.
Well, and that's what I wrote at. I wrote, a sponsor is also imperfect, not a catch-all, cannot give me what they do not have, and no one can have everything.
That's right.
We are human and imperfect, and that is part of our beauty.
Yeah.
Essential to make what makes us soft and relatable.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole she is me. When I'm disturbed, when I'm in a conversation and I'm disturbed, she is me. It always is. If I spot it, got it. It really, truly is. And if I can just give myself the space to see that. And so the anonymity and the unity is that we are here for a particular reason, but the anonymity of being a human being,
Yeah. Well, again, you're using that term, give ourselves some space, give ourselves the ability to pause, give ourselves an improvement in our consciousness. This is my daily bullseye target. I want to be more conscious today so that I can be more human today. Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Paul, then tennis, please.
Go ahead. Oh, before Paul talks, I wanted to just add something. This tradition 12, whenever it's not all the time, but I've got this pet peeve about it in meetings when it's read, because you read anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles above personalities. And when people say it all together, principles above personalities at the end, that always kind of irks me, because I feel that that's putting this tradition, this principle before other traditions. Mm-hmm. Get it?
Yeah, it's interesting. And you're making a point, Tanis, and whether you were doing that consciously or not, you come from the Al-Anon perspective. And in this area, the words are quite different between AA and Al-Anon. Al-Anon says principles above personalities. AA says principles before personalities.
Right.
I have no idea what the significance of that is. I've not actually given it much thought, but you just reminded me that the wording is different, and it's different for a reason. I'm assuming Al-Anon developed their principles based on AA's, but after AA's principles. So do you have any comment on that?
I think the thing is, yeah, it says putting principles before personalities in the AA one, the Al-Anon one, above personalities. You know, I'm not quite sure, but I do know that there's times where, you know, a wording can be very,
well, it was obviously intentional. I don't know what the intention was. That's all. I mean, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but Al-Anon took everything from AA and made the modifications that were necessary to make it effective for the Al-Anon, and including the steps. Even the steps are changed a little bit to reflect the culture of Al-Anon. So I'm wondering what the intention was for changing that word. That's all. It's just almost an academic question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Yeah.
All right.
That's
Yeah.
Thank you. Tracy.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Paul. Yes.
I loved, like you made that distinction between service and the way I heard it, you know, a few years ago from you is think of helping others. And for me, that was a big one. I came from a very hierarchical group, and that view of service was a very militant notion. It was. Yes. And like you talked about like how many people you know you're supposed to sponsor someone for every year you're sober, and you know, catalog of commitments and how many book studies you go to. And you mentioned it's becoming the general of AA. It's actually a formula for becoming a hologram, because all of that stuff is outer directed. And what happens, at least for me, I don't like the word toxic, but unhelpful, because what happens is I walled myself off from myself. And when I'm living that way, it's like, well, I don't have anything helpful to share for the newcomer, so I just won't say anything. And that's how that process starts of separating me from me. And it's so not helpful, and it took me to a very dark place, and it was just magnification of that other directed. So the idea of just think of helping others, that is so much more easy. And like, it puts the family back into it. It's the lady who needs help crossing the street, whatever. That notion of altruism, not just a formulaic, how can I be a badass in AA? And
well, that's where a group can become a religion rather than a spiritual program. AA's intent is to be authentically spiritual. There's no rules. It's a relationship with power other than yourself. That's it. Unfortunately, human beings inevitably corrupt the spiritual nature of it and create a religion. That's why we have so many religions.
Yeah.
Really, seriously, they corrupted the original experience of the founder and codified it in institutional regulation.
Absolutely. I laugh because I think of that meme you see every once in a while of Jesus, a picture of Jesus. I never said any of that stuff, and that really resonates with me.
Thanks.
Great discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Tracy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Herb. So just thinking about all our conversation here and how much things have evolved in the last 80 to 100 years, wherever we're at right now. Don't ask me to do the math. But when we were talking about, like, you know, certain special interest groups and, you know, how things evolve, like going back to tradition 3, like the only requirement is a desire to stop, fill in the blank for any of our groups.
Right.
And my home group right now, I'm in OA. We're going through a bit of a transition because with COVID, a lot of the meetings went to Zoom. And we're in a bit of a situation right now that's requiring, again, a pause and reflection and thought and prayer. Because initially when it was a face-to-face meeting, It was in a women's center, and kind of the rule of the center, I think it was for, it might have been for battered women, I'm not sure. But anyways, the meetings were being held there, and it was only females, I guess, or self-identifying females that could enter the building. And then it went to Zoom, and now they're continuing with Zoom, but we're kind of in this conundrum about advertising the meeting, because the service office feels like we wouldn't be, if it's a women's only meeting, then we're violating some of the bylaws or the principles or the traditions. So I guess, I guess what I'm trying to say.
That's a really, really good discussion, because it applies to, for instance, there's meetings that are special for attorneys, for doctors, for psychologists, for psychiatrists. All right, there are specialty meetings, and the basic one that you're representing is a women's stag versus a men's stag. Now, I think they're totally legitimate. All right, I think they're very actually necessary. The individual, but if in fact that's the single diet of a person belonging to that group, then I don't believe that that's healthy. I think that it's important to have perhaps a specialty group. All right, but the major part of my program needs to be integrated with complete diversity. All right, I go to mixed meetings, not just pilots meetings, but pilots may need a meeting to go to. Psychiatrists may need a meeting to go to. Men certainly need a meeting to go to. This only men, and not the possibility of any distraction. And perhaps women the same, where they feel safe and they're not in the periphery of or the circumstance of having men, the vulnerability of having men in the room. I think it's a wonderful point.
Well, and the issue is right now is how, our group has to do a group conscience. So we've got a month kind of to think about all this and come up with some answers at our next business meeting.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is, if we're abiding by tradition 3, that, everyone is basically welcome. If you have a desire to stop drinking, stop eating, whatever, stop eating drugs, you're welcome. But then, so it's kind of like the discussion gets bigger, because then it's like, okay, well, if we're going to stay Zoom, then do we have, again, the old fashioned way where you have to know somebody to get in and get the right codes and passwords and all that? Or do we publicly advertise with the blurb saying this is a women's only meeting? It's just, it feels a little bit more complicated, but I'm sure
it is a little bit more complicated, and the group conscience will help you sort it out. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's what's going to be the most helpful given your mission. So get really clear as to what the mission is.
Right.
All right, because that's very analogous to what's the operating principle? What's the mission here?
Mm-hmm.
The mission is, I'm assuming, is a safe space for women.
Yeah.
And if you keep that, then I think it'll guide you in the group conscience. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm so glad you raised that, because we hadn't talked about that particular aspect of the tradition, application of the traditions. Thanks, Tracy.
Oh, thanks, Herb.
You bet. Karen, please.
Hi, Herb. Thanks a lot for these workshops. I just get so much out of just listening. I don't participate a whole lot, but I did have a couple of comments, and then I had a question for you. But the principles before personalities, I always took that to mean, and I didn't come up with this myself, obviously, that it's the group before the individual. Principles before personalities. When I look at it like that, it's really,
that's tradition 1 and tradition 2. The group is critical, the person is important, but the group comes in preference to the individual.
Right. Yeah. And then one of your gentlemen said a phrase that was helpful to me as well, talking about mirrors all around us. And I really liked that concept. That was really nice. I wanted to ask you though about your your definition of altruism,
Yes.
is it really possible to do something? I mean, if nothing else, you get a sense of well-being from doing something.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's possible to do it. Okay. All right. Just wanted to clarify that.
No, I agree. Underneath, there's always this awareness that I'm going to feel better. Or in the 12th step, I'm going to be able to stay sober. Yeah. So yes, I mean, we can't escape, but we just need to be aware of what our motives are and just make sure that there's a predominance of healthy intention. Yeah.
Thank you. And thanks again for the workshops. They're just wonderful.
Well, I'm glad you, I mean, obviously people keep coming and they keep showing up and they keep contributing. So I'm assuming that it's supporting our journey. Thank you so much. Brian, please.
Hi, Herb. One quick thing. There's a Friday night large speakers meeting. They're going to go back to meeting in person now after the 2-year Zoom arena. They have a steering committee. So when you talk about group and group consciousness, is a steering committee part of that?
In part of the group conscious, yeah, you need to
to point them in the right direction. And
there's a brochure called The Group, and I believe it contains the description of how to form and create a healthy group conscience. That's a very important awareness to have for a group. Number one, that they have a group conscience periodically. Some groups do it once a year, some do it once a month. But it's really important for a group to have a group conscience, because the whole point in the traditions of the group is to carry the group's message. Well, what is the group's message? All right, so that's the question for the group conscience. And then, of course, you can't bring everything to the total group each time. It would be chaos. So a steering committee is really the leadership. I mean, we can use the term. It's a leadership group based on whatever the criteria of the group is, to meet outside of the meetings to talk about how to have a healthy meeting. Yeah, I'm so glad that you raised that, because that's probably the most critical piece of the whole traditions discussion is group conscience.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at my notes, see if there's anything else. Spirituality is action. It's a relationship with life, a relationship with myself, a relationship with others. I've heard from Chuck C., love is a verb. I just love that. So succinct. It's about action. It's not about knowledge. It's not about feeling. It's a verb. Faith without works is dead. That comes from the scriptures, of course, but my own sponsor used it to help me. He said, willingness without action is fantasy. I thought that was brilliant on his part. Motivated me anyway. And then you've heard this, I'm sure, in meetings, and it's just words to live by. What you think and feel, it's interesting but not relevant. What you think and feel, interesting but not relevant. What you do is the only meaningful and effective reality. What you do is the only meaningful and effective reality, because what you do tells you what your principles are. What you do tells you what your beliefs are. What you do tells me who you are, tells me who I am, what I do. If I really want to take inventory, do the history of my feet. Lisa, please.
Sorry, I'm making notes there. Thank you. I'm Lisa and Al-Anon. And I guess I kind of wanted to ask a little bit something that's been itching in the back of my brain here. Probably, and I think the itchy part is probably because the itchy part is probably where maybe I'm not taking in the right context. Because we've been talking about the invisibility of the person.
Yes.
Not the invisibility of the program.
Yes.
And when I hear invisibility of the person, I immediately cringe. But I'm thinking that invisibility of the person, not invisibility of the program, in the context that we're talking about is at the public level.
Yeah.
And so if that's what we're meaning, I don't need to cringe.
No, it absolutely means that, but it also has implications in the group. All right, in the group itself that you're in. I don't ever want to be the, how do you say, the center point of the conversation or the personality in the room, even though a lot of that happens anyway, just because I go there for the last 38 years. All right. But I think your interpretation is correct. In the context, it's really at the public level, the invisibility of the individual connected to the fellowship.
And that's a good point you made too in the group about not being the
special.
Not being the central focus and the special. I mean, yes, my presence is important, but not as the central focus. So it's kind of, I guess, kind of keeping the balance of that perspective versus, because where it makes me cringe is just because as my survival instincts, I think, of coming up from what brought me to Al-Anon was to be a wallflower and to be invisible. And sometimes that's a factor of safety, but in the process of growing up and recovering, I have to start learning when that doesn't always work. And I have to start learning how to not be a wallflower in appropriate and healthy ways.
I'm so glad that
and
you're
how to not be invisible.
Because if in fact you're invisible in your group, you're not going to be very helpful. Yeah, you know, you have to be real, and I'm so glad you brought that point up. Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Okay. Thank you.
Ashley, please.
Just two quick things that came up. I wanted to mention that my first sponsor advised me not to use names in meetings directly. Obviously.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
So, well,
your name or other people's names?
Other people's names.
Oh yeah, why?
Obviously, yes, I know, but also even in the lead share, she mentioned if we were thanking the person for their share.
Oh, I see.
Because
I agree with that, by the way.
That meant it wasn't like an old boys club where everybody knew everybody in the room and's been hanging out and felt.
I've been listening to speaker tapes over the last 6 months. It's new for me to take my walk and listen into speaker tapes. And I cringe, to use Lisa's terms, I cringe at the first 5 or 10 minutes of these speakers acknowledging by name all the people in the room, like elevating these people to some type of special level. So I'm so glad that you're mentioning that. I think it's people do it because it's the culture and or whatever else, and or sincere gratitude. I just don't think it's appropriate. Yeah.
And then the other thing was on page 185 of the Tradition 12, it says, as the AA groups multiplied, so did anonymity problems. Enthusiastic over the spectacular recovery of a brother alcoholic, we'd sometimes discuss those intimate and harrowing aspects of his case meant for his sponsor's ear alone. The aggrieved victim would then rightly declare that his trust had been broken. When such stories got into circulation outside of AA, the loss of confidence in our anonymity promise was severe. It frequently turned people from us. Clearly, every AA member's name and story too had to be confidential if he wished. This was our first lesson in the practical application of anonymity. And I really
think that's so important, Ashley.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you raised that. That's right. Referring to other people's stories in a meeting is totally inappropriate. And
Yeah.
in fact, using any type of information I have about one sponsee, even anonymously talking about the story to another sponsee, even to teach them a lesson, is totally inappropriate. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, and I think it's really because I also don't know if that person's going to want. I could also be eclipsing that person's right to want to share that in a meeting.
Correct.
And I do cringe. I've had sponsors who've mentioned sponsees to me, and I'm like, I don't want my short story.
Exactly.
And so there's a level of trust there, but a lot of people I've heard say in Al-Anon meetings, oh, as long as you leave the name of the person out.
No way, no way.
I mean,
I'll carry it to this point, and you've probably heard me share this in a fifth step conversation. When I hear somebody's fifth step, when I see them before or after or in a meeting or before or after in a marketplace, that same person, I will never bring up anything they ever said in the fifth step.
wow.
Oh, no, I would never initiate the conversation. If they initiate the conversation, all right, then but I would never say, so how are you doing with that? You know, I would never do that. That's totally anonymous, totally confidential.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that too. So yeah, so it's just also noticing and then also giving myself great, finding balance of giving myself grace, because in order to talk about any issue, I have to have some details shared with some person at some point. And just leaving as much of story actually as I can out of it to get to the principle, like you're saying.
Depends. Sometimes the story is really important on a personal, private level. I have listened to people for an hour.
No, on the personal, private.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the point then.
So I was saying the personal, private level is where I share the story, and then
yes.
And I try not to get, I leave the name out of it, but I share the story because story is where I identify personally and get intimate. But there's just a balance. It's always, I'm just saying there's a balance there. And then on the group level, trying to, if I'm sharing, identify a principle that I, if I'm conscious of it,
Yeah. That's really the point is, why am I talking? What am I trying to say? What is the point? What is the meaning of it? These are wonderful questions that we've surfaced today to challenge ourselves to be as conscious as possible, because we can slip into either unhealthy habits or cultural expectations, which are unhealthy. So thanks, Ashley, very much. Brian, one more, please.
Thank you all for your sharing. It's been a blessing to me. So, Herb, since we're talking about this, expand just a little bit for me for my health and well-being and this functional process. When I was new in AA, the first 6 to 8 months, I loved it. I absorbed everything like a sponge, and I had 2 or 3 people who either wanted me, I think they wanted to sponsor me. 2 were men who, after 6 or 7 months, and I had just signed on to a sponsor 3 months previously to that, was actually the secretary of the meeting, and it was awesome. But they had come up to me and said, "What's taking you so long on the 12 steps?" Now, I'm not sure what their knowledge of was, but I was working on that with my sponsor, and they were irritated by it.
I don't want to be crude, so I won't be. But I would suggest you just look them straight in the eye and say, that's none of your business.
Yeah, well, I had to ignore it, because if I didn't, the resentment set in, and I had to keep going back to the meetings. And that's one thing I learned about resentments.
Yeah.
It's
probably said on an interest on their part, and they really do want to encourage you, and they want you to be okay. And it's just, I mean, I can't even imagine how inappropriate that is.
Got it. Okay. Well, one other thing that happened is, and again, I learned not to resent this, and that's one of the big things AA taught me was I didn't realize I had internal resentments.
Right.
Was a long-term sobriety person, and her husband and I have really connected at the meetings in many ways. But as we were leaving the meeting and shaking the hand of the speaker, and I was in line, she came up behind me or was near me and pushed me, not hard, but not soft, from the back. And I turned around to see what it was. And she said, "Don't get your feelings hurt." Now I took that as her trying to—
feelings hurt from what?
I guess pushing me. And I took that.
What was her point in pushing you?
I don't think she liked me. I don't know.
Well, were you in line and hesitating and moving forward, or was she just impatient? All right. So as I said, meetings are not the place of the mentally well.
Got it. And it took me a while to understand that, but I thought, wow, one thing I learned in AA is, and that I still have resentments, but sometimes if you've got 30 years sobriety, your resentments can still ooze from your pores about something or someone. And that taught me internally to be more aware of my own resentments.
Good. Yeah. Time is not a criteria of recovery. It's an indication that you have some abstinence, but there are people with 20 years of sobriety, and that's 1 year 20 times, meaning that they haven't grown emotionally or spiritually, because they really just go to put the plug in the jug and go to meetings, and you will not change. In fact, you will harden in terms of some very unhealthy outlooks and habits. Yeah,
indeed.
All right. And there's a pamphlet in AA on that. It's called the Dry Drunk Syndrome. If you haven't read it, it'd be wonderful for anybody to read that.
I'll get it.
Yeah. It's probably online. You could probably go to I just went to the AA new website. It's very robust, and they have lots of things online. Thanks.
AA.org or
whatever. Yeah, I don't pay that much attention to it.
Okay,
that'll probably get you there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Probably .com, but I'm not sure. Ashley.
Hi, one final question. In your working with others suggestions, you say find out all you can about them in order to put yourself in their place, indirectly from a person close to them, their family, is one of your suggestions. And so how do you balance anonymity with that, finding out all you can about it?
First, it's not my suggestion.
Oh.
What you're reading from is a summary from reading chapter 7.
Okay.
So all I'm doing is saying what the big book says. That was written in 1939. It was probably really good at the time. I don't think anybody would give that suggestion today. To talk to somebody's family about the individual could be helpful if you're going to prepare for an intervention. Otherwise, probably the Al-Anon people would say, stay away from that kind of conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, team. Again, a robust, wonderfully filled discussion concerning both your knowledge of and your experience with these traditions. We'll gather next month to really kind of take a look at the entire panoramic view of the 12 traditions and the application to our personal lives. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to manage the conversation, but it will be mostly you're reviewing the work that you've done and the traditions and the resources that you have, and framing your experience and your questions so that we can continue to have the kind of dialogue we had today. It was, I mean, I learned a lot and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Please join me. Obviously, I've adapted the prayer of St. Francis to our occasion today. Practice these principles of alignment. That's my word. It's not in the big book, but that's my word for the commitment we make in step 3 to be in alignment, in parallel with reality. Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to this life. Amen. That traditions probably could be, in fact, captured in that phrase, self-forgetting. Not in the unhealthy sense, the invisible sense, as Lisa talked about, but that we're not the center of the meeting, we're not the center of the fellowship, we're not the center of the world. We're the center of our own world. And we need to take responsibility for that. Thanks, everybody.